My name is Samantha Scott. I'm 29 years old and I just watched my mother sell my $4 million dream out from under me for a measly $15,000 check. Now I'm going to make sure she pays back every cent. The smell of fresh cedar and expensive jasmine always greeted me like a warm hug the moment I stepped onto the wraparound porch. It was the scent of my soul. For 5 years, I'd poured every ounce of my being and every cent of my inheritance from my late father into this place. I'm Samantha Scott, and to most people, this was just a $4 million estate in the hills. To me, it was the masterpiece that proved I wasn't just little Sam. I had hand-sanded the oak floors until my palms bled and picked out every marble slab in the kitchen like they were precious gems. "Just 2 weeks, Sam," I whispered to myself, dragging my suitcase toward the front door. "NYC was a success, and now you get to sleep in your own bed." I reached for my keys, the familiar weight of the brass keychain a comfort in my hand. But when I slid the key into the lock, it didn't turn. I tried again, harder this time. The mechanism felt tight, different, cold. "Looking for someone?" I whirled around. A man in a high-visibility vest was standing on the lawn, holding a clipboard. Behind him, a massive white moving truck was backed up to my flower beds, the ones I'd planted with blue hydrangeas just last spring. "I'm the owner," I said, my voice coming out thinner than I intended. "Who are you? Why are you on my property?" The man looked down at his clipboard, then back at me with a pitying squint. "Owner? Name on the work order says Miller. We're finishing the loadout today. New owners are moving in on Monday." The world tilted. The jasmine scent suddenly felt cloying, suffocating. "New owners? No, you're mistaken. This is the Scott estate. I'm Samantha Scott." "Look, lady," he said, gesturing toward the driveway. I followed his hand. My heart stopped. Nestled among the manicured hedges was a sign I hadn't noticed in my excitement to get home. Sold. Not just sold, the agency logo at the bottom wasn't the one I used for my design firm. It was a boutique firm my mother, Evelyn, frequented. My phone felt like a block of ice as I dialed her number. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, she picked up, her voice as smooth and chilled as a glass of expensive Chardonnay. "Samantha, darling, you're back early." "Mom?" I choked out, watching a mover carry my hand-carved mahogany coffee table, the one Dad gave me, into the back of the truck. "There are people in my house. They're saying it's sold. Tell me this is a mistake. Tell me you didn't." There was a brief, sharp silence on the other end. "Don't be dramatic, Sam. It's just a house. Meet me at the Ivy in 20 minutes. We'll discuss your new beginning." The line went dead. I stood there, a blonde woman in a designer suit, looking like a queen, but feeling like a ghost, watching my entire life being packed into a cardboard box.
The Ivy was a sea of white linens, clinking crystal, and the low hum of people who had never known a day of true desperation. I felt like a jagged piece of glass in a room full of polished silk. My hands were still shaking as I pushed past the maitre d' and scanned the patio. I spotted her immediately. Evelyn Scott sat under a cream-colored umbrella, looking like a portrait of old money Grace. Her blonde hair, a shade lighter than my own, was pinned back in a perfect chignon. She was sipping a latte, her eyes focused on a fashion magazine as if she hadn't just dismantled my world. I didn't sit. I slammed my palms onto the table, rattling her saucer. "How?" I hissed, my voice cracking. "How could you sell it, Mom? The title was in my name. The deed was in my vault." Evelyn didn't flinch. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her drink before looking up. Her eyes were as blue as mine, but today they were as cold as a winter lake. "Sit down, Samantha. You're making a scene," she said softly. It was the tone she used when I was 6 and had skinned my knee, dismissive and faintly embarrassed. "I don't care about the scene. I care about my life. That house was everything I had." She sighed, a long, weary sound, and reached into her designer handbag. "You've always been so literal, darling. Everything you had. You have your health, you have your talent, and now," she slid a slender white envelope across the tablecloth, "you have a fresh start." My fingers felt numb as I tore the envelope open. Inside was a single slip of paper, a bank check. I stared at the numbers. I blinked, sure the sunlight was playing tricks on my eyes. $15,000? I whispered. The air felt thin. "The house was appraised at $4 million, Mom. I had offers for 4.2 before I even finished the landscaping. Where is the rest of it? Where is my money?" "The money is where it belongs," Evelyn said, her voice sharpening. "It's in the family accounts. Your brother, Jackson, he's had a very difficult year with his tech startup. He needed the liquidity to keep his dreams alive. You, on the other hand, have proven you can build something from nothing, so I've decided you'll do it again." "You decided?" I felt a surge of hysterical laughter bubbling in my chest. "That was my property." "Actually, I do," she said, leaning forward. The mask of the doting mother dropped, revealing the iron-willed woman underneath. "Do you remember 3 years ago, Samantha, when you had that terrible bout of pneumonia and were delirious for a week? You signed a limited power of attorney so I could handle your medical bills and your firm's payroll." My stomach dropped. I remembered the haze of fever, the white walls of the hospital, and my mother's soothing voice telling me to just sign this so she could take care of things. "I never revoked it," I breathed, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "You didn't," she said, leaning forward. "You were always too busy with your tiles and your paint swatches to worry about boring paperwork." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "That check will cover a security deposit on a nice apartment in the valley and perhaps a few months of groceries. Be grateful, Samantha. Most daughters don't get a $15,000 gift for being careless." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking rhythmically against the stone, leaving me alone at a table for 2 with a piece of paper that wouldn't even buy the marble I'd installed in my own foyer.
The nice apartment in the valley turned out to be a gray, one-bedroom box that smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. My fresh start was a place where the walls were so thin I could hear my neighbor's nightly news, and the plumbing groaned like a dying beast every time I turned on the tap. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the few boxes the movers had actually delivered here. Most of my things, my Italian leather sofa, my collection of vintage architectural sketches, the Persian rugs, were gone. "In storage," the foreman had said, but I knew my mother's storage usually meant a high-end auction house or Jackson's new bachelor pad. I pulled out my laptop, the screen's glow the only light in the darkening room. I needed to see the damage. I logged into my social media, expecting a wave of support. Instead, my stomach did a slow, sickening roll. Evelyn had been busy. She'd posted a photo of the 3 of us from last Christmas, Jackson looking smug, Mom looking regal, and me looking happy. The caption read, "So proud of my daughter Samantha for choosing to sacrifice her estate to save her brother's future. Family is everything. It takes a big heart to walk away from luxury to help those you love." The comments were a minefield. "What an angel," one of Mom's socialite fans wrote. "So brave of you, Sam. We heard you were struggling with the upkeep anyway," wrote another. She hadn't just taken the house, she had pre-written the narrative. If I screamed theft, I'd look like a spoiled brat recanting a gift. I tried calling Sarah, my best friend and business partner. It went straight to voicemail, again. Fine,
I whispered into the empty, echoing room. "You want to play the martyr, Mom? Let's look at the books." I didn't spend the night crying, I spent it digging. I might have been careless with paperwork, but I was a shark with numbers. You don't flip a $4 million estate without knowing how to trace a dollar. I pulled up the public records for the sale of the Scott estate. Something was wrong. The Miller family the foreman mentioned, there was no Miller. The house had been sold to an entity called ESJS Holdings LLC. ESJS, Evelyn Scott, Jackson Scott. The sale price listed in the public registry wasn't $4.2 million. It wasn't even the $4 million appraisal. It was listed as a transfer of title for a nominal sum of $1. My mother hadn't sold the house to save Jackson. She had sold the house to herself for the price of a candy bar, and she'd used my name to do it. But if the house was now hers, why the $15,000 check for me? Why the startup lie? I leaned back, my head thumping against the cold drywall. The $15,000 wasn't a gift. By accepting that check and cashing it, I would be legally acknowledging the transaction as a settled matter. It was hush money disguised as a handout. Then I saw the second filing, dated just yesterday. ESJS Holdings had entered a pending sale agreement with a massive luxury developer for $4.5 million. The math finally clicked. They weren't just taking my home, they were laundered my hard work into a $4.5 million payday that would vanish into their accounts before I could even find a lawyer who would believe me. I looked at the $15,000 check sitting on my cardboard desk. I hadn't cashed it yet, and I wasn't going to. "You think I'm a builder, Mom?" I said to the dark room, my voice steady for the first time in 48 hours. "You're right, but I'm also really good at demolition." The sun crawled into my new bedroom like an uninvited guest, highlighting the dust motes dancing over my unopened boxes. I didn't feel like the woman who had been featured in Architectural Digest last month. I felt like a ghost haunting a cheap rental. I skipped the $15,000 check. It stayed pinned to the wall with a thumbtack, a reminder of the price my mother had put on my soul, and grabbed my car keys. I still had my car, a sleek silver SUV that looked entirely out of place in this neighborhood. It was the last piece of my old life that hadn't been liquidated yet. I drove toward the Silicon Beach district, where Jackson claimed his startup, Next Gen Nexus, was headquartered. If Mom was burning my $4 million house to fuel his fire, I wanted to see the flames for myself. The address led me not to a high-tech incubator, but to a luxury high-rise with a rooftop pool and a valet who looked at my SUV like it was an antique. "I'm here to see Jackson Scott," I told the concierge, injecting as much old money ice into my voice as I could muster. "Penthouse B, Miss Scott. He's expecting you?" "It's a family emergency," I said, not lying. The elevator ride was silent and fast. When the doors slid open, I wasn't greeted by whiteboards and coders. I was greeted by the heavy thump of bass music and the smell of expensive cigars. Jackson was lounging on a white velvet sofa that looked suspiciously like the one I'd custom ordered for my sunroom. Around him were three guys in sharp suits staring at a massive screen displaying live horse racing. "Jackson," I said, my voice cutting through the music like a blade. My brother jumped, nearly spilling his drink. He looked at me, and for a second I saw the little boy who used to hide behind my legs when he broke a vase. Then the mask of the successful CEO slid into place. "Sam, you found the place. Mom said you were taking some personal time in the valley." "Mom said you were building a tech empire," I said, walking toward him and ignoring his friends. "This looks like a gambling den with a better view." "It's market research, Sam. Data analytics for the gaming industry," he stammered. His eyes darted to his friends. Look, I know you're upset about the house, but it's a loan. Once the Series A funding hits, I'll pay you back every cent, plus interest. There is no Series A, Jackson, I said, leaning over the sofa. I saw the LLC filings. Mom gave you a $4.5 million gift by stealing my life's work. How much of it is already gone? One of the men at the table laughed. Gone? Scott's down $500,000 on the Derby alone. He's the best customer we've ever had. Jackson's face went pale. The successful CEO crumbled. Shut up, Mike. I felt a cold, hard clarity settle over me. This wasn't a family helping a family. This was a mother feeding a son's addiction with his sister's flesh. You didn't just take my house, Jackson. You took it because you're a loser who can't stop betting on horses that don't win. And Mom, she's the one holding the leash. She loves me, Sam, Jackson yelled, finally standing up. She knows I'm destined for big things. You're just a decorator. You can always paint another wall. I didn't slap him. I didn't scream. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I'd been recording the whole thing. You're right, I said, heading for the elevator. I am a decorator, and I'm about to do a complete renovation on both of your lives. I left him there, the bass music starting up again, sounding like a funeral march. I had the why, I just needed to find the how to stop that $4.5 million sale to the developer. My mother thought she was the only one who knew how to use a power of attorney. She forgot that I was the one who designed the security system in that house, and I still had the remote access codes.
The silver SUV felt like a getaway car as I killed the headlights and coasted to the curb 2 blocks away from my estate. The neighborhood was silent, bathed in the amber glow of street lamps and the scent of expensive mulch. This was the zip code of hush hush and not in front of the neighbors. But tonight, I was the ghost in the machine. I walked toward the house, keeping to the shadows of the towering hedges. The sold sign was still there, mocking me in the moonlight. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that felt louder than my footsteps. I reached the side gate. I'd designed the keypad myself, a sleek, brushed steel unit hidden behind a decorative ivy trellis. I pressed my thumb to the scanner. A soft melodic chirp followed, and the magnetic lock clicked open. I was in. Stepping into the backyard was like walking through a graveyard of my own dreams. The infinity pool was still, reflecting the stars like a cold, black mirror. I didn't head for the back door. I headed for the pool house, which doubled as my secondary server room. When I'd renovated the estate, I hadn't just focused on aesthetics. I was obsessed with smart home integration. Everything, the lights, the security cameras, the climate control, and most importantly, the digital logs of every person who entered or exited was routed through a central hub. I slipped inside, the air-conditioned chill of the server room biting at my bare arms. I pulled out my tablet and plugged into the hardline. My fingers flew across the screen. "Come on, Mom," I whispered, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. "You're a master of appearances, but you're a dinosaur with technology." I bypassed the administrative locks using my master overrides. I wasn't looking for photos or emails. I was looking for the digital notary logs. To sell a house in this state, especially using a power of attorney, certain digital signatures and timestamps have to be recorded in the home's secure vault for insurance purposes. I found the file. My breath hitched. The logs showed that the transfer to ESJS Holdings hadn't happened 3 years ago when I was sick. The digital signature was stamped 4 days ago. It was a backdated forgery. Evelyn hadn't just used an old document, she had used a digital overlay of my signature from a recent business contract to authorize the sale while I was in New York. Then I saw the notification on the dashboard. Closing scheduled tomorrow, 10 a.m., location on site.
The developer wasn't just buying a house, they were meeting there to sign the final papers and hand over the $4.5 million wire transfer. Suddenly, the floodlights on the patio roared to life. I froze. My shadow stretched long and distorted across the server racks. Through the glass window of the pool house, I saw a black sedan pull into my driveway. A man stepped out, tall, wearing a sharp suit and carrying a briefcase. He didn't look like a developer, he looked like a fixer. He walked straight toward the main house, but then he paused, his head turning toward the pool house. He reached into his jacket, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was pulling a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a phone and started dialing. I had the proof of the forgery, but I was currently a trespasser on property that, on paper, I no longer owned. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. "I know you're there, Samantha. Don't make this more difficult than it already is." My mother's fixer wasn't just here to check the locks. He was here to make sure the ghost didn't haunt the closing. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The text message on my screen glowed with a predatory light. "I know you're there, Samantha." I looked through the glass. The man in the suit, the fixer, was walking toward the pool house with a slow, measured stride. He wasn't rushing because he knew there was only one way out. He had the keys, the authority, and the shadows on his side. But I had the code. "You think this is your house now?" I whispered, my breath fogging the tablet screen. "Let's see how well you know the plumbing." My fingers danced over the emergency override menu. I didn't trigger the burglar alarm. That would bring the police, and right now the police would see me as the intruder. Instead, I tapped the landscaping and maintenance tab. Outside, the fixer reached for the pool house door handle. I swiped my thumb across the screen. Suddenly, the night was filled with a high-pitched hiss. 24 high-pressure industrial sprinkler heads erupted simultaneously. A wall of recycled gray water slammed into the fixer, drenching his expensive suit in seconds. He let out a strangled shout, slipping on the wet flagstones. I didn't stop there. I hit the exterior lighting strobe test button. The backyard turning into a chaotic disco. Thousands of watts of LED floodlights began flashing in a blinding, disorienting rhythm. White, red, white, red. It was designed to disorient intruders, and it was working. The fixer was stumbling, shielding his eyes, trapped in a watery, flashing nightmare. I grabbed my tablet and slipped out the back service door of the pool house, staying low. The grass was slick and cold against my ankles. I ran toward the north perimeter, where I knew the hedge had a small gap behind the stone fountain, a detail I'd left for the neighborhood cats, never thinking it would be my own escape hatch. I scrambled through the thorns, the sharp branches scratching at my arms, until I tumbled out onto the sidewalk of the adjacent street. I didn't look back. I ran 3 blocks to where my SUV was parked, my lungs burning with the taste of ozone and fear. I threw myself into the driver's seat and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely pull up the file I'd downloaded. The digital notary log was still there, the proof of the forgery, but as I scrolled down, I saw something new, a signature I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just my mother and Jackson. The developer's legal counsel had already pre-signed the acknowledgement of the power of attorney. They knew. The developer wasn't an innocent victim in this. They were in on the fast-track sale. They wanted this land at $4.5 million so badly, they were willing to look past a forged signature to get the deal done before anyone could contest it. If I went to the police tonight, the paperwork would be tied up for months, but the closing would happen tomorrow anyway, and the money would vanish into 100 offshore accounts Jackson had probably already set up. "They want a show," I muttered, wiping a smear of mud from my cheek. "I'll give them a grand opening they'll never forget." I looked at the clock. 1 a.m. I had 9 hours. I didn't need a lawyer. I needed a printer, a very loud microphone, and the one person my mother feared more than a judge, the local news anchor she'd been trying to impress for a decade.
The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour business center buzzed overhead, a sharp, surgical contrast to the nightmare in the shadows of the estate. I smelled of recycled sprinkler water and desperation, but as the printer whirred, spitting out high-resolution copies of the forged signatures and the gambling debts I'd screenshotted from Jackson's computer, I felt a cold, hard strength returning to my limbs. I checked my watch. 4:30 a.m. I took a deep breath and dialed a number I'd saved years ago after designing a home office for Victoria Vance, the city's most formidable investigative journalist. She was the kind of woman who wore pearls like armor and viewed a no comment as a personal challenge. "Victoria," I said when she answered on the fourth ring, her voice thick with sleep but quickly sharpening. "It's Samantha Scott. I'm about to hand you the biggest white-collar scandal this zip code has seen in a decade, but I need you at my house at 10 a.m. And Victoria, bring the cameras." The rest of the morning was a blur of caffeine and calculated risk. I didn't go back to the Valley apartment. I went to a high-end gym, used a day pass to shower, and changed into the one power suit I'd managed to grab before the movers took everything, a sharp, ivory-white blazer and trousers. I did my hair until it was a polished blonde shield. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like the owner of a $4 million estate. At 9:55 a.m., I pulled my SUV up to the gates. The sold sign was still there, but the gates were wide open, welcoming the fleet of black town cars currently lining the driveway. I walked through the front door. The foyer, my beautiful marble-floored foyer, was filled with people. There was the developer, a man in a charcoal suit who looked like he measured life in square footage. There was Jackson, sweating through his shirt and twitching every time a phone chimed. And there was Evelyn. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a crystal flute of champagne. She looked up as I entered, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second before the mask of maternal concern slammed back into place. "Samantha," she said, her voice projecting to the room. "Darling, we didn't expect you. It's lovely that you came to say goodbye to the house." The developer stepped forward, extending a hand. "Ms. Scott, a pleasure. We're just about to authorize the wire transfer. Your mother mentioned how selfless you've been." "Is that what she told you?" I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings I had designed. I didn't take his hand. Instead, I walked to the center of the room, right where the light hit the polished oak. "The only thing selfless in this room is the effort my mother put into forging my signature." The room went dead silent. Jackson dropped his phone. It hit the marble with a sickening crack. "Samantha, you're tired," Evelyn said, her voice dropping into a dangerous low octave. She stepped toward me, her hand reaching for my arm like a vice. "Let's go into the kitchen and talk about your health." "We're done talking in private, Mom," I said, stepping back and pulling a folder from my bag. "The $4.5 million you're about to receive isn't going to a startup. It's going to cover the $2 million Jackson owes to offshore bookies. And this house, it wasn't sold 3 years ago. It was stolen 4 days ago." I tossed the forged digital notary logs on the glass coffee table. The developer leaned in, his brow furrowing as he scanned the timestamps. "What is this?" he asked, his voice losing his professional sheen. "It's the reason you're going to stop that wire transfer," I said, "because if you don't, you're not just buying a house, you're buying a felony." Evelyn let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "No one will believe you, Samantha. It's your word against mine, and I have the paperwork." "I don't need them to believe me," I said, pointing toward the front door. Right on cue, Victoria Vance stepped into the foyer, followed by a cameraman with a red light on his shoulder. "Actually, Evelyn," Victoria said, her signature smile as sharp as a razor, I think the viewers of the 6 o'clock news would love to hear your side of the story. Shall we start with the forgery or the gambling?
The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the hum of the camera and the frantic, shallow breathing of my brother. The developer, a man who clearly valued his reputation as much as his bank account, didn't wait for an explanation. He looked at the forged documents, then at the camera, and finally at my mother. "The deal is dead," he said, his voice like dry gravel. "My legal team will be in touch regarding the bad faith negotiations. We're out." He signaled to his associates, and within seconds, the room emptied of everyone except the family, the journalist, and the cold truth. Jackson collapsed into one of my velvet chairs, burying his face in his hands. "I'm ruined," he moaned. "The bookies, they aren't like you, Sam. They won't wait." Evelyn didn't look at him. She didn't even look at me. She stared at the camera lens with a terrifying, vacant smile, still trying to protect the image of the woman she used to be. But the mask was cracked. The ivory white walls of the foyer suddenly felt like a cage. "Turn that off," she commanded Victoria, though her voice lacked its usual steel. "The public deserves to know how the saint of the Scott estate really treats her own blood," Victoria replied, her tone professional yet biting. She nodded to her cameraman. "We have enough. Let's go." When the heavy front doors finally clicked shut behind the news crew, the house felt cavernous. "You think you won?" Evelyn whispered, finally turning to me. Her eyes were rimmed with red. "You've destroyed the family. You've left your brother to the lions, all for a pile of bricks and mortar." "No, Mom," I said, walking over to the marble fireplace where a photo of our family sat in a silver frame. I picked it up and looked at the three of us. The lie we had lived for years. "I did it for the truth. You didn't sell a house. You sold me, and I'm worth a lot more than $15,000. I didn't wait for her to respond. I walked out, leaving them in the house that was technically still theirs on a forged paper that was now a legal death warrant. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of depositions, court hearings, and a very public fall from grace for the Scott name. With Victoria's report as the catalyst, the transfer of title was declared fraudulent. The estate was returned to my name, and a restraining order ensured that Evelyn and Jackson stayed far away from the gates. I didn't move back in. The jasmine scent I once loved now smelled like betrayal. Instead, I sold the house, properly this time, to a family that wanted to fill it with laughter instead of secrets. On the day the final sale closed, I sat in my new sun-drenched studio in the city. It wasn't a $4 million mansion, but every brick was mine. A courier arrived with a small package. Inside was the $15,000 check I had never cashed, now crumpled and stained. I put it into a new envelope. I added a small handwritten note on my new professional stationery. "Dear Mom, I heard the bank foreclosed on your condo and Jackson is in rehab. You always said I could build something from nothing. Here is a little something to help you try the same. Good luck starting over." I licked the seal, feeling the weight of the past finally lift. I wasn't just a builder of houses anymore. I was the architect of my own life, and for the first time, the foundation was solid.